America has been destroying its goodwill all around the world, and no more so than over the last 2 years. The Ukraine war has stretched Western soft power to its precipice, and Russia and China are pushing back harder than ever. An anti-American alliance is growing the world over. Countries are realizing there are other options, that living under US hegemony is not the only possible direction to take, and China and Russia are giving these countries those other options that many countries are choosing to adopt. In particular, Russia and China have declared war against the US dollar, intent on bringing it to its knees, on ending its global role as the single most important currency. And for those who think this doesn't matter, just take a look at how much money printing the US has been doing for the last few decades. Take a look at how much debt the US prints every single year, and ask yourself why no other country in the world has ever been able to debase themselves for so long before. Foreign demand for the US dollar and American debt is what allows the states to print so much cash. But as this war on the dollar escalates, that demand is going to drop further and further, and the US will find itself in serious trouble. Last week, the US debt burden rose to such a ridiculous degree that the interest payments on that debt have now reached more than $1 trillion every single year. For comparison's sake, that's more than the entire economy of every single economy in the world except for the largest 17 nations. The warnings China and Russia have been levying are over. We are now seeing action, and we need to pay attention because this threatens all of us. Of course, at the stem of all this lies the war in Ukraine and American support for Ukraine directly against Russia. Whether or not you agree with either side morally, no one can disagree that Russia is being targeted by the US, and of course they are going to fight back. Hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military aid has been sent over to Ukraine in a flood of arms. American tanks are fighting against Russia as we speak. American planes have been sent over to shoot down Russian planes. American missiles given to Ukraine to strike back at Russian forces. Now, most people will be forgiven for not seeing what Biden recently announced, because the entire news cycle is instead focused on his ineptitude or on shows designed purely to turn people against Trump. But Biden did something that you need to know about. He gave the direct go-ahead for Ukraine to use American weapons to strike Russia itself. Ukraine have been hitting Russia since the beginning, of course, sending helicopters across the border, striking oil refineries and other high-value Russian assets. But until now, Western weapons had only been allowed to strike what was previously Ukrainian territory. Even striking Crimea led to a lot of controversy and many in the West worrying about what sort of action Russia would take back. And now American missiles will be striking Russia itself in what is essentially an escalation of this war. This has escalated to the point where just a couple of weeks ago, a British member of parliament actually stated directly that we are already at war with Russia. We just aren't using our own soldiers to fight that war. France has been taking things a step further still, saying that French troops could be deployed to Ukraine, and not in advisory roles, and not just special forces either. Full-on conventional troops fighting a full-on war against Russian soldiers in Ukraine.
We are actually at war with Russia now.
We've got.
They not just haven't told you. They haven't told you.
So say that again.
We're actually at war with Russia now. I met with Andrei Kelin, the Russian ambassador in London, a couple of months ago, and he said that we know that your people are firing those Storm Shadow missiles at us out of Ukraine because you couldn't train the Ukrainians to do it. So we know you're doing it. And I mean, everybody knows that there are lots of US, UK, French. The French are in there.
I thought it was the Brits were down on the ground and special advisors.
Yeah.
Training sessions and teaching them and showing them.
Isn't that how?
But they were apparently. That's how we started with the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Dude, what the frack are we doing poking the bear?
Russia sees this the exact same way, as a concerted Western effort to destroy Russia, and they are not going to sit idly by and allow this to happen, and no one would reasonably expect that to happen either. Now, Russia doesn't have the same options as the West does. Of course, they can do the usual stuff, send bombers over to the UK and get us to scramble some jets, send a fleet to Cuba to re-strengthen ties with the island and likely threaten the US. But they aren't in a position to directly strike or use proxies to strike at America without instantly causing a world war eruption, so instead, they've turned their attention to the real source of America's strength and power, the US dollar. Putin made a speech a few weeks ago directly calling out this escalation and stating that they won't stand idly by, that their retaliations will come, and that they are going to hit the West where it hurts them, its economy. Now, we know all about the West's attempt to cripple the Russian economy, and we know that they were mostly ineffective. Thousands of Western companies left the Russian market overnight to deprive Russia of access to Western companies, But the sanctions were weak and ill-planned. McDonald's still exists in Russia today, it's just no longer called McDonald's. A puppet Russian company has simply been set up as the face of the brand, and the products still run freely. Russian oil and gas was targeted in an attempt to dry up Russia's income, but Europe has been dependent on Russian gas for years, so it's simply kept on flowing. India and China have placed their countries first and decided to buy up Russian oil at massive discounts and simply export their own supplies to the rest of the world. The result? Russian oil still reaches the global markets. It's just the US and Europe who can't buy it, leading to price hikes all across the West and innocent civilians suffering under obscene inflation. $300 billion of Russian assets were seized by our governments, wealth simply stolen from Russia, allowing Russia the appropriate justification to do the exact same back to us and attack our economy as well. And that is exactly what we saw last month. Putin signing a decree allowing Russia to claim any American assets they had access to in retaliation for those assets taken by America already. Already, the Kremlin has identified $290 billion worth of American assets it is ready to take, and that's after they have already seized $1 billion worth of physical assets. The US dollar's strength lies in the simple fact that for almost 100 years, it has been the most widely accepted currency around the world. If you had to pick one currency to hold whilst in any country, the US dollar was the safest bet. You, as an individual, could spend it more easily than any other. And if you were a corporation, the same was true as well. Pricing goods or services between a country like the Philippines or Brazil, they would use the dollar as an intermediary. Buying oil from an Arab country like the Chinese government, that purchase would be made in dollars. And a government trying to back its central bank up with adequate wealth, that was always done in US dollars as well. But that is now changing. China is buying oil from Saudi Arabia with their own currency, something that had never before happened in history before the US overflexed its economic might with their reaction to the Ukraine war. Countries are reducing the amount of US debt they hold. They're reducing the amount of US dollars they hold as reserves. They are reducing global demand for the US dollar, and this will impact everyone in the West. In particular, the BRICS alliance has been working together to remove the influence of America from their shores. And while South Africa and Brazil are hardly economic titans to be fearful of, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China cannot be ignored. And as now 17 new countries like the UAE, Iran, and Malaysia aim to join the BRICS as well, this organization's control of global resources is only going to increase. So what happens when all these countries together simply bypass the US dollar and use their own currencies to trade with one another? Americans get poorer. That's what happens. The alliance between Russia and China is growing closer by the day. They both see America and Europe as their enemies, as hostile states seeking to diminish their power, and they are both run as dictatorships where power is the only thing to covet. This change will not happen overnight. It will take years for the US dollar to lose its reserve status, but the process has more than likely already begun, and it started with the US overestimating its hand and assuming it could strike at Russia, with Russia never striking back. Now we're witnessing other crisis points emerging as well. China has made it clear their intention to take over Taiwan with military force, and the States has made its intention to do as it has with Ukraine and arm them to the teeth to make that as hard as possible. When an invasion happens, we can expect this entire process to start all over again, except this time with the direct enemy being China, a country with even closer economic ties to us all than Russia, and so it follows logically that the impacts we'll feel will be even greater still.